Two guys in the dark.
We must have been 13 at the time, nearing the end of the still respectable trick-or-treating age. It was just the two of us, Shauna and me. Other friends of ours were grouped up in their own candy crusade, and it was the first year that I hadn't joined up with the usual small circle of friends for the night of door-knocking and the shrill calls for junk food to fill our pillowcases. This year, however, was going to be different. One fall afternoon, I was hanging out at our local park. The usual suspects were all there. The kids from school, the boys from the hockey team, and a couple of stragglers hanging out with the loose ends of their frayed jeans. Of course, the usual games were going on. Freeze tag, teeter-totter, and testing our ability to withstand G-forces of the merry-go-round. Shauna lived directly across the street from the park. During that summer, I became aware of something new and marvelous. Shauna's smooth, tanned, and shapely legs. One day she strode across the road, in through the gate, and across the lush green grass like a goddess. Her dark walnut hair swayed, with eyes that flamed with a new light, and a smile that made me dizzy, nervous, and very happy. It was a full-on puppy love infatuation, but I was a year her senior, and I was definitely not cool. Moreover, becoming aware of girls in a romantic sense had just begun to happen for me. Learning how to speak to girls would take just a few more years to master with any dignity. But by fall, a few things had fallen into place that led to my one-night, one-on-one evening stroll around the neighborhood with my crush. First off, I lived half a block away. We often found ourselves walking home together on the final stretch to the top of the town where our home streets bordered the forest, the rest of the entourage having forked off earlier on the way. This gave me about 7 to 10 minutes of private time to display to Shauna what a charming little bugger I was, while I was stumbling and stammering over words, letting her know that I thought she was as sweet as a caramilk bar. The second point in my favor is that some dummy had just broken up with Shauna. She was feeling down. Her heart was freshly broken. Meanwhile, all summer long and into the school year, I had been there for her. Foolish, fumbling, awkward. Her stalwart admirer, and her amateur confessor of affections. Losing the boyfriend also left her temporarily on the outs with her social circle, confessing to me while we rode the swings in the setting after. Shauna didn't feel like going to anyone's Halloween party. She suggested that we go to skip Halloween and trick-or-treating altogether. Now, while I wasn't very tall and stylish, cool, or even athletic, I was the opposite of the flavor of the day for girls of the dating age. I wasn't an asshole. I was a sweetheart, good listener, genuine of heart, and a little Mr. Pick-me-up. The world already had enough assholes as it was, and from what I could see, they were still being produced at a rapid rate, so I was sticking to being nice and playing the long game. When I told her that I would gladly drop my friends to take her door to door for the night, she smiled and asked, "Do you mean like a Halloween date?" I said, "Shauna, you're like the prettiest girl in town sight. It's what we called our part of town on top of the mountain. And even if it's just a Halloween date, that's pretty cool for me." I didn't mind torpedoing my self-esteem if it lifted hers a bit. We both knew going steady wasn't a real possibility. We were going to wear masks, hang out for a night as other people, and ignore the rules of our social circle. It was fun, going out. I was dressed as a ninja, wrapped head to toe in black, with only the over-alert and searching eyes open between the mesh. A plastic samurai sword in a sheath over my back, my belt loaded with throwing stars. I was a deadly chunky monkey, and on my arm I had a Princess Jasmine. Shauna's dark hair, tanned complexion, and her youth frame were devastating in swaths of sheer fabric. What a babe. We laughed and joked as we crossed paths with friends, and with Shauna's veil covering her face, only my sharp blue eyes were visible. Many people weren't able to confidently assert our identities. We'd done it. We'd slipped away with our identities beneath our costumes, for at least a few hours. It was just a boy who had liked a girl, who enjoyed being liked by this boy. As we made our way down the home stretch, the final blocks towards home, high on the sugar rush from the candy and chocolate, maybe even a little bit of romance, Shauna let me take her hand in mine. We didn't say anything about it. I just reached over and laced her fingers in mine, kept our feet moving, our eyes mostly down. Little did we know that the real evil was lurking behind the door of the next home. Hell's Night was just one knock away. The house looked like every other house on the block. Small miner's house was built by the town mine company decades ago, spruced up, and extended in size by an addition, covered in the typical thin sheet roof to assist the heavy accumulation of seasonal snowflakes in sliding off, and ringed in the standard white wooden fence. Lights were on, and the sounds of a party rang down the walk. What we couldn't know was that this wasn't a Halloween party. This was actually a drinking party. Shauna and I strolled up the walk, up the cement stairs to the door. We had knocked on the door, and then we hollered, "Trick or treat!" We waited. There was no answer. The rock music was very loud. We could hear howls, calls, and laughter mingling with curse words. Shauna had said that we should go. I said that we should just yell even louder. We knocked again, and we yelled much louder. The door had flung open. On the other side of the screen door stood a long-haired, Scooby-Doo-looking shaggy dude wearing an even more raggedy-looking underskirt. He was drunk, possibly even high, and instead of handing out candy, he was tossing F-bombs. I can't explain where it had come from, but even at that young age, I found myself believing I was 10 times larger when in the company of a girl. So rather than backing off the steps and skirting away from the crazy standing across the threshold, I mouthed off to him. I asked this loser what he expected when it was Halloween night, and his lights were on. Surely he hadn't been the only trick-or-treater banging on his door. Up to this point in my life, I had only been in the company of happy drunks. Those men were the typical over-affectionate, joyous drunks of the 3 Hungarian families that my parents socialized with. This punk was the other kind of drunk, the really mean kind. The screen door flung open. His arms had reached out, grabbed Shauna, and began pulling her inside as he said something about having her join the party. Screaming ensued. Shauna was pulling back, trying to get free from his skeletal grasp. I was screaming at him to just let go of her, and he was screaming at me to get lost. I dropped the candy bag, grabbed the screen door in my hands, and slammed it against his arm and the door frame. Shauna was let free. I clenched her hand, and we bolted off the steps, sprinted out of the yard. The lunatic drunk screamed at us. The door had slammed, and he was on our heels. We hit the street and began running for our lives when the guy pounding the pavement behind us. Scared kids run pretty fast. Drunk men happen to run less fast. But the blind rage this guy had kept coming at us, screaming that he was going to kill me with every heart-pounding stride. We kept running, screaming, and Shauna was bawling in terror. We kept running as fast as we could. My house was right there. I held tightly onto Shauna's hand, pulled her behind me across the corner of our park pad, down the ramp along the side of the house, and then yanked her into a hard right, dashing into the always unlocked basement door, slamming the door right behind me. Shauna and I fell over on our backs against it, shaking, crying, and trying to catch our breaths between gasping sobs. 2 seconds later, the door at our backs was kicked open, and Shauna and I turned to see the murderous, sweaty, violently cursing face of our pursuer pressed against the window of the basement door, his fist pounding on the window as Shauna and I used all the strength we had to keep the door from being pushed all the way open, while screaming for him to go away and yelling for help. The basement was our old storage. Next to the door stood a wall of deep wooden shelves filled with dirt. In the soil were potatoes. The damp, cool air smelled like earth and death. Then suddenly out from the darkness, my father had emerged. In a millisecond, he had pulled Shauna and me behind him, reached into the dirt bins, and pulled out a potato. Then stepped to the door. He reefed it open, grabbed the maniac by the throat, and jammed the whole raw potato into his mouth. I remember the shock on the drunk's punk face. He didn't know what had just happened. His eyes were the size of saucers, and before he could even react, My father had grabbed him by the hair and threw him backwards, stumbling, sending him falling on his ass. Then my father had slammed the door, locked it, grabbed the two terrorized, bawling, and shaking children, took us inside and upstairs. Shock of him must have set in. I can't recall much of anything afterwards. Shauna was driven home, and I was still upset. The great Halloween date had ended in terror. I lost my bag of candy and treats during it all. I also was shocked at how my father came to our rescue, and would later share nervous laughter with Shauna about how that guy must have felt suddenly having a dirty potato jammed into his mouth. I was also super impressed that my father was kick-ass when he needed to be. All in all, I still recall the sweet, soft lightness of Shauna's hand in mine the night Halloween terror became a real thing. It was definitely a night to remember. My name is Anne. Back in 1973, when I was 16, my younger sister, my dad, and I had just moved into a new house that my dad had built in a remote area near the Heights in Minnesota. In this area, there was only one other house a few slots away from us. When we moved in on Halloween, my dad had to leave town for a little while and gave my sister and I a key and instructions to move my stuff in. None of my dad's belongings were there just yet, except for some furniture. I got ready to go to a costume party with my older sister, who didn't live with us at the time. She picked us up at around 7 p.m., just as it began to snow. During that Halloween party, I had met a friend, Jay, and was enjoying his company so much that I decided to continue the conversation with him at my house. We got there at about 1:30 a.m. After realizing we didn't win the Halloween costume, I was dressed up as a witch at the time. Me and my sister had our own domain downstairs. The house was huge with 2 kitchens. Jay and I were sitting downstairs in the large living room that had windows all around, right around ground level. Where Jay and I had been sitting, we could see the driveway and the front door. We had one lamp on, and the light at the front door was shining and illuminating the driveway and the room. Around 2:30 in the morning, we were sitting on a love seat chatting away. At no time did we discuss anything Halloween-related, like the supernatural or paranormal. Suddenly we heard a voice. First I noticed the voice was like no other that I'd ever heard before. Then I noticed what the voice was vocalizing. To my horror, this voice was moaning in a pathetic and horrible way, filled with loud pain and suffering. I remember marveling at the tone of the voice. It was no different, and seemed to come from everywhere at once. Then, just when I thought that I couldn't take any more, it went from this horrible moan to this insane, maniacal laughter. It was absolutely terrifying. Then it went back down to a moan, back to a laugh, then back to a moan once again, before stopping. Jay and I looked at each other wide-eyed and open-mouthed. "It has to be a Halloween trick. Someone is playing on us," I said. "Yeah," Jay replied to me hesitantly. "Let's search around and see if we can find what is going on." Jay agreed with me, so we both went towards the hallway. Jay took the stairs up to the foyer. I continued down the hallway to my little sister's room. I had opened up the door and noticed that my sister was truly asleep. I woke her up anyways and asked her if she knew anything about what was going on, or if she had heard it. My sister was irritated with me for waking her up, but said that she had heard nothing, which was mystifying considering the volume. I went back down to the hallway, towards the living room, just as Jay was coming down the stairs. He was as white as a sheet. "I heard it again up there," he had said. "No way," I replied. "I wasn't that far away. I should have heard it too." Neither of us could explain it. No joke. Jay and I went back to the living room. We sat down on the love seat. We talked about the happenings and affirmed that we both had experienced the same thing. Then we changed the subject, tried to forget about it when it happened yet again. This time, though, the sound this time seemed to permeate our very souls. Jay and I suddenly felt very sad. When the moaning and laughter stopped this time, we both knew that this wasn't a joke of any kind, and we weren't ready to admit it to each other. "All right," I said. "The search is on. We find out who this prankster is or else die trying, right? We search every inch of the house outside. No one had come near the house in hours. I could tell by the new layer of undisturbed snow. We spent about 45 minutes looking in ovens, freezers, lamps, even under the table in the house, under every single couch, in every couch, around chairs and corners, and ultimately throughout every inch of the property. We had found nothing, and no one, and I knew of no one who could even think of such a Halloween prank, let alone anyone who could execute it with such professionalism. I described the sound as the most frightening voice that I had ever heard, and by some horrible misfortune, I was able to hear it yet again. I swear that my heart would stop instantly. Yet my Halloween horror wasn't over just yet. Jay and I had finished our search. We went back downstairs. We started to discuss the possibilities that something supernatural was actually happening, but then we brushed it off. In some kind of crazy delusion, we wanted to believe that it was really just a joke somehow. This illusion could soon be crushed. The eerie voice began yet again. Only this time it was nothing like the other times. Now it had shook us completely. Jay and I were both completely filled with feelings of despair, hopelessness, helplessness, and pointlessness. I struggled to say something, but I couldn't manage it. It felt pointless to think at all. Tears were streaming from both of our eyes. We both experienced the sensation of our skins crawling. I truly believe that I and Jay were in the presence of pure evil, and on a personal level at that. When Jay and I had snapped out of it, we looked at each other, saw the tears on our faces. When our eyes met, I knew that Jay knew exactly what I was experiencing, and vice versa. We were also convinced that this was no prank. By now it was close to 4 o'clock in the morning. We were literally exhausted. Jay had refused to leave me and my sister here alone. So he decided to sleep on the couch, and I went to my room. I spent the rest of the night in terror. I was worried about going near the bedroom door, because the image of a creature waiting to kill me on the other side. I felt that this was not coming from our minds, but rather it was coming to me from somewhere else. I laid awake until the sun was up, and I heard Jay awake out in the living room. It was definitely a horrifying experience that I will never forget, and I remember like it was just yesterday.
If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, like, and hit the bell for notifications on future videos, and become a stalker of the night. And I'll see you next time.